Welcome to the International Air Tattoo, IAT, which is quite simply the biggest military air show in the world. It's so big that there just isn't room in 1 year for it and Britain's other major aerial event, the Farnborough Air Show. So the two shows alternate, and in 1987 it was IAT's turn. IAT is unique in several ways. First, it's almost entirely run by more than 2,000 unpaid volunteers, like these air traffic controllers. But although they're unpaid, they're all professionally qualified for the jobs they do. All of the profits that result from this free labour force's efforts go to the Royal Air Force Benevolent Fund. Then there's the sheer length of the flying display. This year it was almost 8.5 hours long. But perhaps the best thing about IAT is the variety of things to see. Each IAT has its particular themes, and one of the themes this year was Skylift 87. It's probably the world's first truly international military air transport meet, with the Swedish Air Force and the Americans being just 2 of the 18 air arms involved. This particular C-141 Starlifter long-range troop and cargo transport was unusual in Britain at any rate because it had an all-woman crew, and we'll be talking to some of them later. And its bigger brother, this C-5B Galaxy, was there to represent the really heavy end of the military transport world. This thing is huge by any standards. It's as tall as a 7-story building, and its freight bay is big enough for the Wright brothers to have made their whole first flight within it. We'll be taking a closer look at it later, both on the ground and also in its strangely graceful flight. We shall also be looking in more detail at this comparative veteran, the Buffy, the B-52 strategic bomber. The prototype flew 35 years ago, but there are still plenty of Buffys about. It takes us away, for the time being, from the transport aircraft. As does this KC-135 air-to-air refuelling tanker. Now, one of the problems with a video that can't be more than an hour long is how to squeeze in more than 8 hours of flying display. So what you're seeing now is a preview of just some of the highlights of IAT 87 that are coming up later. But away from the heavies, the agile, fast jet fighters are always good crowd pullers, and the exotic-looking twin-jet F-15 Eagle is no exception. This one belongs to the United States Air Force, as do the last 4 aeroplanes that we've seen. The United States gives great support to IAT, not least through the fact that IAT's home at Fairford in Gloucestershire is actually an active USAF base. But this sleek piece of kit, although an American-built F-16 Fighting Falcon, belongs to the Royal Norwegian Air Force. And this is our own Royal Air Force Falcon F-3. We won't actually be seeing more of this particular aeroplane later, because there's another Tornado in the show from the West German Navy. That one is the much more numerous ground attack bomber version of the Tornado, the GR-1. This model, the ADV, which stands for Air Defence Version, or in RAF terminology the F-3, has so far only been bought by the RAF and the Saudis and the Omanis. But it represents state-of-the-art technology in air defence, and it was at the show as the modern end of another IAT theme, Sky Shield 87, celebrating 75 years of British air defence. Not quite that old, but still going strong nearly 30 years after its first flight, is the ubiquitous McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom. And before we leave the modern fighters for the time being, a chance to catch that Norwegian F-16 as he perpetrates the tiniest of bounces on landing. It's encouraging to see that even the best pilots do that sometimes. Now an aeroplane that goes back 46 of those 75 years of British air defence, a Spitfire Mark 5B of the RAF's Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. These two don't go back quite that far, but they do represent the immediate post-war years. The Vampire and Venom were among the world's first jet fighters. They call themselves the twin-boom duo. Now, you can't really call a couple of aircraft like that a formation team, but these gentlemen you most certainly can. In any competition for the world's best large formation aerobatic team, you'd surely find the British Red Arrows, the French Patrouille de France, and maybe one of the 2 American teams, the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels. But this team, on a good day, is extremely hard to beat. They're the Italian three-coloured arrows, the Frecce Tricolori. And just to show there's no ill feeling, here are those red arrows, or rather 4 of them, taking off to go to another display. And if the antics of the 2 aeroplanes on the right-hand side of the runway are anything to go by, there's a certain amount of turbulence over that runway. Oops! And another. Never mind, they'll be back later. Now, jet formation aerobatics are a comparatively recent innovation, but girls on wings, that goes back to the real flying circus days of the 20s. In fact, Leslie Gale and her pilot Bob Thompson call themselves the Hugo Carr's Flying Circus, and later on we'll see just how aerobatic that old Boeing Stearman can be with Leslie standing on the top wing. Well, we've had a biplane and we've had formation teams, so here are the 2 combined. These are the Halcones. They're the Chilean Air Force display team, and this is their first visit to Europe. So not only do you see the big teams at IAT, you also get smaller part-time teams that you'd never see anywhere else. In fact, there were no fewer than 9 aerobatic teams, including 2 helicopter teams, and look at this for a spectacular break. Plus, you get 2 parachute teams. These are the French Équipe Phénix parachutists from the French Air Force Academy. Although they had to jump from pretty low altitude because of the weather, they kept us on tenterhooks by keeping stacked up until the very last minute before landing. No British airshow would be complete without the Vulcan, the British equivalent of the USAF B-52 that we saw earlier. But what a difference in concept. Instead of the lumbering heavy bomber style of the Buffy, the Vulcan achieved almost fighter-like performance with its big delta wing. Another difference though, there are hundreds of Buffys still in service, but this is the only Vulcan left flying. Another Delta, this one dating from a mere 20 years ago, but still very much in service. Some people say this is the most beautiful aeroplane in the world. And who can argue as Concorde arches its graceful neck like the very embodiment of the dream of the great white bird. Something rather more prosaic to look at now, although the lowering storm clouds about it do suggest something dramatic. And what could be more dramatic than the departure in his own TriStar of the patron of the International Air Tattoo, King Hussein of Jordan. And we'll be hearing from His Majesty on his own flight deck later.
A rather sedate aircraft compared with some of the others that you've flown in the past.
But of course there's much more to a show like this than the flying display. You can get really close to lots of aircraft on display on the ground. You can fly through the air with the greatest of ease. Or you can be rather more cerebral at the manufacturer's stands. You can even do it in several languages. And you can also buy your own Red Arrow's Hawk. For the participants in the Skylift 87 Air Transport meet, there's a formal dinner. And the trumpeters of the Western Band of the Royal Air Force. And for the rest of the aircrew, who don't have to rush away as soon as the show is over, there's a monumental party. In the course of it, trophies are presented. Like the Super Kings Solo Jet Aerobatic Trophy and winner Flight Lieutenant Paul Brown of the Tornado F3. So, having whetted your appetite, let's take a slightly closer look at some aspects of the show. Every flying day, there's a briefing for all the aircrew who are actually going to be flying. They don't exactly look fired up with enthusiasm, do they? But, boring as it may be, it's all part of the meticulous preparation that goes into making the show as safe as possible. Although the entertainment is important, it takes second place to safety. So the aircrew, being professionals, accept the briefings as necessary evils. The substance of the briefing is a minute part of the preparation for the show that's been going on virtually since the last one finished 2 years ago. The IAT has a small salaried staff, half a dozen executives and their hard-working assistants. For them, the biennial shows, plus the other smaller shows that IAT runs in between times, are a full occupation. For the other 2,000 volunteer staff, who are professionally qualified wherever necessary, it's a question of giving anything between 1 and 4 weeks of their own time every show. And each show produces a crop of people who swear they'll never do it again, but somehow they mostly appear again next time. Anyway, even the most jaundiced and cynical show organiser tends to get quite fired up if he or she can come and watch this sort of thing at close quarters. This is the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle of the United States Air Force, and it's based at Bentwaters in Suffolk. As it pops in and out of the low cloud, the weather really wasn't very kind at IAT-87. You can see that it's doing what's known in the trade as a flat show, or a ratty-flatty as I've heard it described. What that means is that the aeroplane has to restrict its manoeuvres and not do anything with vertical in it, like loops or upward rolls. One good thing about conditions that are as moist as this, and that's the condensation effects you get, things like these trails off the wingtips. The way it works is this: when the pilot's pulling hard on the aeroplane, making it pull a lot of G, the wings are producing a lot of lift, which they do by making low pressure, suction, above the wing, and high pressure below it. And sometimes air spills round the wingtips and forms a spiral vortex of low pressure that trails back from the tips. When the air is as damp as this, that low pressure condenses the moisture and you can see the shape of the vortex. You also get flash clouds of condensation forming in the low pressure area on top of the wing. So there are the vortex trails. And there are the flash condensation clouds over the wing. It was a pity we only got a flat show because vertical climbing is one of the F-15's strong points. In 1976 it achieved no less than 8 world records for time to height. The most startling was that it got to 65,000 feet, that's more than 12.5 miles high, in 2 minutes and 3 seconds. The way they did that was to have a stripped-out aircraft with minimum equipment on board and run it up on full afterburner power while it was tethered to the runway. They cut the tether with an explosive bolt and the thing just launched itself. It carried enough fuel for the 12-mile climb and then it glided down with just enough fuel to relight the engines before landing. And landing technique is interesting here. The pilot is using a lot of aerodynamic braking. That's to say, he keeps the nose up so as to present a big area to the airflow and slow himself down without using the wheel brakes. Also, as he rolls down the runway, he demonstrates the big air brake on the back of the aircraft. That's just for show here, it only works properly at high speed. And here's the kind of close-up view that you can get of the aeroplanes in the static display, although the ones here won't actually be the same ones that are flying. Well, let's slow down a bit and take in some of Skylift 87. You may remember that IAT describes that as the first truly international military air transport meet. And far and away the most numerous military transport aircraft is the Lockheed C-130 Hercules. This one belongs to the Royal Air Force.
So it's Master Engineer Brian Mason, sitting in the cockpit of a C-130 Hercules. And I wish to know when this plane was built, which year.
This plane was built in January 1968 by Lockheed, Georgia.
And what are you mainly doing with the Hercules in the RAF?
It splits into two parts, really. We do a worldwide transport commitment, and we also do a lot of close support, airdropping, working very closely with the Army here in UK and also in Germany.
And search and rescue operation as well?
Yes, we have a search and rescue commitment, especially in the Falkland Islands. That's one of our main jobs down there, is a search and rescue commitment.
One of the advantages of a big transport is that you get lots of space for sunning yourself, or just taking a stroll if the sun isn't out, which it mostly wasn't at IAT 87. As Squadron Leader Peter Kingsford from No. 47 Squadron, based at Lynham in Wiltshire, shows a fairly short takeoff, note that this particular aircraft has an air-to-air refuelling probe above the flight deck. The refuelling capability of the RAF's Hercules was added so that they could make it to the Falklands and back if necessary without landing. We'll see more of that capability later. Now, if you look closely at this one, you'll see that it doesn't have the probe, and that makes it the normal C-130K that the RAF has, or as they call it, the Hercules C-1. They also have a stretched version that they call the C-3. Marshals of Cambridge added 2 extra lengths into the fuselage of that to make it 15 feet longer. Well, this one isn't that, it's the standard version. Well, standard for the RAF, that is. But since Lockheed's have sold the C-130 to more than 45 military air arms around the world, there's usually no such thing as a standard model. As well as the uses that the RAF puts it to, it can also be a flying hospital, an aerial photo mapper, an airborne command post, a weather observer of things like thunderstorms, hurricanes and icebergs, and a heavy gunship, as well as umpty-dump other uses. The ubiquitous C-130.
Wake up.
Now, the Hercules is quite ancient. The prototype first flew 33 years ago in 1954. But this beast is 2 years older than that. It's the huge 8-engined B-52 strategic bomber, the Buffy as I called it earlier. But, old as it is, it's still going strong. This one belongs to SAC, the Strategic Air Command of the USAF. As it rumbles down the runway, look at the little wheels on stalks at the wingtips. They're there because when the wings are stationary and not producing lift, they droop. But as the Buffy gains speed, the wings curve upwards and those little wheels come off the ground. And note how odd the main undercarriage is. 4 pairs of wheels virtually on the centre line of the fuselage. The B-52 is probably the biggest, heaviest and most powerful bomber ever built. The maximum takeoff weight of the biggest version, the H model, is 505,000 pounds. That's more than 225 tons. The most famous action the B-52 was involved in was the controversial saturation bombing in Vietnam, when earlier models carried as much as 70,000 pounds each of ordinary high-explosive bombs, which they rained down on huge areas of tropical forest in the hope of hitting unseen guerrillas. That 70,000 pounds, incidentally, is more than 3 times as much as the now-retired Vulcan could carry. Later models of the Buffy now carry such weapons as the air-launched cruise missiles. Altogether, 744 of them were delivered to the USAF between 1954 and 1962. Its replacement was, and is to be, the controversial B-1 bomber, but the delays involved in that project have meant that the B-52 has served rather longer than its manufacturers Boeing originally intended. But just to put it in perspective, although this is a big aeroplane by most standards, the biggest versions of the jumbo jet weigh more than half as much again. Well, that was 1940s and 50s technology. This is a creature of the 1970s and 80s. As the reheat lights up in the 2 turbo Union RB199 engines, they're producing 30,000 pounds of static thrust between them. It's a Panavia Tornado of the West German Navy, and as Lieutenant Commander Joe Rammer gets the wheels up, we get a good look at the fully forward position of the wings, because of course the Tornado has variable sweepback. This is the 25-degree sweepback position, which is used for maximum manoeuvrability. But as the commander comes round for his first flypast, you can see him bringing the wings back to their fully swept position at 67 degrees of sweep back. And as he climbs away, you can see the sleeker silhouette, and the aeroplane almost looks like a delta. But not for long, because those wings are already coming forward again, so that Joe can get manoeuvrability rather than high speed in his display. Those rails that you can see under the wings are the mounting points for the wide variety of weapons that the Tornado can carry externally. But one of the interesting things about variable sweepback is that you still need to keep your weapons pointing forward, so those rails have to stay parallel to the fuselage, whatever the sweepback angle. Joe Rammer has another lieutenant commander as his crewman. He's called Udo Schultheiss. Joe says he only chose him because he thought he was a member of the famous German brewing family, but they get on pretty well anyway. As they weave their 15-odd tons of aeroplane around with the wheels down, we can get a good view of the huge flap area at the back of the wing. It extends over the whole wingspan, which means that the ailerons, which are normally on the wings, have to be combined with the elevators on the tailplane, and on the Tornado they're called tailerons. And there's that great flap sticking out like a barn door and giving the Tornado its demonstrably good low-speed handling characteristics. Interestingly, though, the German version has slightly less extension on the flaps than the British version, goodness knows why, and that gives it an approach speed about 4 knots higher. Tornado is, of course, a tri-national project between Germany, Italy and Britain. We make the front and back of the fuselage, Germany makes the centre, and Italy makes the wings. But each country assembles its own whole aeroplanes. As the Tornado touches down, you can just see the reverse thrust buckets coming out at the back of the jet pipes. They deflect the jet efflux forward to improve the braking and hence the short landing capability. And as the aircraft rocks under the strain and the Germans almost disappear in a cloud of spray, you can see how they would have stopped in under 2,500 feet of ground run, less than a quarter of the runway available at Fairford. Clearly they're not the only ones disappearing in a cloud of spray. But the weather does seem to be improving as the Spanish Air Force takes the runway. A case of the rain for Spain staying mainly off the plane, perhaps? No? Oh well, please yourself. These are the 6 Spanish-designed and built Casa 101 aviojets of the Team Aguila, the national team from the basic flying school of the Spanish Air Academy. Now, if you're thinking that these aeroplanes don't really look quite as smart as the Red Arrows or the Frecce Tricolori, that's because the Team Aguila are one of the several part-time teams that come to IAT, and their aeroplanes are in the standard colours of the Air Academy. Now, to say that is not in any way to denigrate them. In fact, the part-time teams are greatly to be admired, because they have to do all their training in the early mornings and late evenings at the ends of their normal instructing duties. So, unlike the big teams, who do virtually nothing else and therefore should be pretty good, these guys really do it for love, and they do it on a pretty small budget. Their aeroplane, the C-101 Aviojet, is a 2-seat trainer built in Spain by Construcciones Aeronáuticas S.A., CASA for short, with some development help from MBB in Germany and Northrop in the US. It's got a Garrett Air Research TFE 73122J turbofan engine, and as well as this trainer, it also comes in a light tactical fighter version. So, ladies and gentlemen, IAT presents, in the maneuver they call their fan break, the Team Aguila of the Spanish Air Force, led by Major Francisco Carrizosa Duran. Well, from the Spanish fan to the lady behind the fan. The lady in question is 22-year-old Leslie Gale, fresh out of Durham University with a BSc, a skier, rock climber and windsurfer, and now, would you believe it, standing up Loop the Looper. She's also the veteran of 200 free-fall parachute jumps, although presumably she's banking on not having to put that skill to use while she's doing this. She's also banking on the wing of that Stearman, and the fan she's behind is the propeller of the big 450 horsepower Pratt & Whitney radial engine. With her pilot, Bob Thompson, and their Boeing Stearman 1930s American trainer aircraft, she's booked for more than 60 air displays in the 1987 season. Well, a touch of Beauty and the Beast here, from the graceful lines of Leslie Gale to the squat shape of the A-10, or the Warthog as it's affectionately known. It's a tank buster, and that 7-barreled Gatling gun is one of its weapons. It's 20 times more powerful, that gun, than the guns on bombers in World War II, though they fired shells twice the size. The Gatling fires at an unbelievable 4,200 rounds a minute. That's 70 30mm shells every second. In fact, tank-busting aircraft are also known as mud movers, and since Warthogs are pretty good at rootling around, perhaps that's another reason for the name. Since the A-10 is likely to be flying around over the battlefield, it uses its manoeuvrability to keep out of trouble from ground fire. But it also has a thick armour-plated bath affair protecting the cockpit and the pilot. The armour plating is capable of stopping a 37mm anti-aircraft shell. So the pilot, Captain Sean Jesseron from the USAF 511th Tactical Fighter Squadron at Bentwaters in Suffolk, should feel reasonably safe in hostile conditions. As Captain Jesseron comes in for his landing, we get a good view of those big General Electric TF34-100 engines. They were specially designed for this application. They're quiet, so you don't hear the A-10 coming amongst the noise of the battlefield, and they produce much less smoke than other engines, so it's more difficult to pick it out. The A-10 Warthog from the United States Air Force. Now then, what's this arriving? Seems a reasonable landing. It's the same colour scheme as the A-10, but that's where any similarity ends. We're back to Skylift 87 and one of the big transport aircraft, in this case the Lockheed C-141 Starlifter, capable of carrying nearly 200 troops or 31 tons of military hardware, and also capable of in-flight refuelling. And those air traffic controllers in their tower seem to be taking a particular interest in this aeroplane. And when it finally comes to a halt, we can see why. It's an all-woman crew, which, quite apart from the flag, tells you that it's not from the Royal Air Force. In Britain, we seem to be peculiarly conservative about what we allow women to do, and the RAF has yet to train any women pilots. Clearly, the United States Air Force has no such inhibitions. Rainer Kuhn, who always was a smooth talker, got himself invited in to see the women's place of work. Captain Terry Sullivan, equally at home in front of the camera, on the flight deck, or doing her pre-flight checks. And clearly not abashed by flying in the world's biggest military air show.
Global positioning system, no, you're not using it.
No.
It's not in use at the moment.
That works fine.
Vertical aspect indicator. Never seen that before.
all the instruments, even the engine instruments.
Yeah, this I know, but...
Well, I went to the Air Force Academy, and most of the graduates from the Air Force Academy become pilots. And I went to pilot training then in Columbus, Mississippi, and then came straight to the 141.
Which planes did you fly so far?
T-37 and T-38, which are our trainers, are the only ones I've flown so far. Came right into the 141.
And you're staying on this Starlifter now?
I'll be staying on it for at least another couple years, and then I might move to another aircraft.
Galaxy, perhaps?
Perhaps, or hopefully the C-21 or the C-9.
Then obviously you love your job, do you?
Oh yes, I love it very much. It's a great opportunity.
You would do it again?
I wouldn't change it for anything. Really, it's great.
not everyone wants to spend 8 hours plus watching a non-stop flying display. There's plenty else to do, from funfairs to ground demonstrations, and of course the chance to get close to a big selection of aeroplanes in the static display. There's also an arena where there are things like marching bands, motorcycle teams and majorettes. Now, this aeroplane has been entertaining airshow crowds for more than 35 years, and it's still hugely popular. So much so that when it was due to go out of service after the Falklands conflict, a lot of people made a big fuss in important places, like the Air Force Board. And their airships decided that they would keep one of these magnificent beasts flying for the time being. It is, of course, the Vulcan, the most successful of Britain's triumvirate of V-bombers of the 1950s. I suppose one of the reasons for the Vulcan's popularity is that for such a big aeroplane, the Americans refer to it as an aluminum overcast, and its maximum takeoff weight is more than 110 tons. For such a big aeroplane, it has a surprisingly fighter-like performance. In fact, at one Farnborough air show in the early 50s, the Avro test pilot Roly Falk did a slow roll in the then white-painted Vulcan. It was definitely not the sort of thing you expected a bomber to do then, and come to think of it, you wouldn't expect an aircraft of this sort of size to do it nowadays. In fact, this particular aircraft, which is a B Mark II, number XH558, has the distinction of being the first and last B-2 to fly with the RAF. It was delivered to the Vulcan Conversion Unit at Waddington in Lincolnshire in July 1960. After the last Vulcan squadron disbanded in 1984 and the decision was taken to keep one flying, 558 was painted up in the colours you see today. Those crests you can just see on the tail include the Black Panther's head, which is the crest of No. 1 Bomber Group, and the arms of the city of Lincoln. So, the last flying Vulcan. Just a glimpse here of the American TR-1A, the spy plane that was developed from the famous U-2, and that was the plane in which Gary Powers was shot down by the Soviets in 1960. And no, this is not a reconstruction of Gary Powers and friends leaving their stricken U-2. It is in fact one of the Royal Air Force's regular display teams. These are the Falcons. They claim to be the only team of 12 parachutists aiming to land on 2 small crosses, usually after jumping from 12,000 feet and free-falling before opening their XL cloud parachutes. On this occasion they only started from 6,000 feet because of low cloud, but they managed this impressive spiral rendezvous before hitting their 2 crosses. As the Falcons land over on the other side of the field, the aerobatic teams are neatly parked, but one team is ready to go. These are the Frecce Tricolori, the 3-coloured arrows, the Italian Air Force's national aerobatic team. Or at least, this is the first section of 5. There are 10 of them altogether. They are the stars of the 313th Aerobatic Training Squadron in their immaculately turned-out Aermacchi MB339A aircraft. And notice how they've even got the right numbered aeroplanes in the right places. That's important for the way the Frecce work, because unlike the other big teams, they base their display around splitting their main formation of 9, there's one solo performer, splitting the main 9 into 2 sections of 5 and 4. Watch now as the 9 pull up in the inverted triangle formation, trailing the tricolore smoke in the red, white and green of the Italian flag. And as they go over the top of a perfect loop, you can tell it's perfect because they're almost hidden behind the smoke they left on the way up, they change back into diamond, and the 5 and the 4 make spine-tingling aerobatic perfection. This time, the leading 5 are doing individual snap rolls for what they call the Apollo 313th, and then both sections pull up for a loop. But here they're back in that diamond 9 that forms the basis of all big team aerobatics. This is just a flat turn, but even in this simple manoeuvre, look at the near geometric perfection the Italians bring to their art. But all Italian entertainment has to have a clown, in this case the solo performer, Major Ivo Nutarelli, who's a wild Sicilian. But here are the 9 again, doing rollbacks, where symmetrically placed pairs on either side of the formation pull up and do a complete barrel roll back into position. Now here's the Mad Major again appearing out of the murk. On the Sunday of the show, the weather was so bad that we didn't think the Frecce would be able to fly. But the Italians are made of sterner stuff than that. Even their flat show has a certain flair to it as they come by with their wheels down in Big 9, but changing back to basic diamond as Major Nutarelli executes a barrel roll around them. But all good things come to an end, and this is the 3-3-4 formation landing of the Italian national aerobatic team, the Frecce Tricolori. Who's to say they're not the best in the world? Well, probably the Red Arrows would for a start. We'll see something of them later. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, there's a single Red Arrow in the foreground there. But it's those 4 biplanes emerging out of the smoke into a watery sunlight that we're interested in now. Like the Spanish Team Aguila that we saw earlier, this is another part-time team. But this one is on its first ever visit to Europe. These are the Alcanes, and they've come all the way from Chile, on the other side of South America, to be at IAT. The word Alcanes means falcons, and that meant that there were 3 lots of falcons at IAT 87. The parachutists, the Jordanian Falcons aerobatic team, and these gents. Anyway, they fly the Pitts Special, one of the world's great aerobatic aeroplanes. And they're all instructors at the Capitan Avalos Air Force Academy in Chile. So, as the Alcanes head towards the crowd, watch the 2 wingmen, Captain Fernando Venvald and Captain Carlos Rivera, as they put their pits onto their wingtips in a knife edge and brake. In fact, the Alcanes execute some very pretty brakes. Here's another from the classic brake formation of Echelon starboard. The Chilean Alcanes then at their first, but I hope not their last, IAT. Well, the first Pitts was designed in 1942, which makes it about the same age as this. Of the 7,377 Avro Lancaster bombers built during the Second World War, this is the only one left flying. It belongs to the RAF's Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, and it's a regular favourite at all the air shows. Back once again briefly to Skylift 87, the theme of this year's IAT, and the ability of the RAF's Hercules transports to get their refuelling done without stopping. They take their filling station with them, and have been able to since they had to resupply the Falklands garrison by parachute without being able to land there. Incidentally, in case you're wondering why the second aircraft isn't actually plugged in, it's because they're not allowed to at low altitudes, for safety reasons. And no, this isn't another look at the Lancaster, although you can see the family resemblance. It's the Shackleton, which first flew in 1949. The RAF still has it in frontline service today as an airborne early warning aircraft. You can see the big radar dome over the nose. It should have been replaced by the Nimrod AEW, until that disappeared up its radar dish in a memorable political and industrial fiasco. So the RAF is left with a 38-year-old aircraft type until it can get its hands on the Boeing AWACS, which of course stands for Airborne Warning and Control System. Well, this is an AWACS, but it belongs to NATO, and it's the nearest the RAF will get to one until theirs are delivered in 1991. This was one of 2 aircraft that our cameraman wasn't allowed into. The other was the B-52. So, in order to show what an AWACS interior might look like when it's in RAF service, here's a model from one of the exhibition stands. But let's get away from unfulfilled potential and turn to an aeroplane that has more than fulfilled its maker's hopes and continues to realise the dreams of thousands of travellers every year. It is, of course, the Anglo-French Concorde. It was the first, and it is still the only commercially viable supersonic transport in the world, and it looks set to stay that way into the 21st century. It's so beautiful when you see it close up like this that even hardened airshow types can be seen putting down whatever important business they're up to and just standing watching. Lumps appear in throats and beery tears course their way down seamed old cheeks. As the static thrust of 150,000 pounds plus of the Concorde's Olympus 593 engines take it away, we look next at an aeroplane that may not seem so exotic, but which is actually even more luxurious inside. It's the personal TriStar of the patron of the IAT, His Majesty King Hussein bin Talal of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and it's taking off in a torrential downpour. King Hussein is no stranger to jets, but he's perhaps more used to something a bit more racy than a large airliner.
Your Majesty, do you find the TriStar a rather sedate aircraft compared with some of those that you've piloted in the past?
An extremely sedate aircraft, and very modern, and quite a difference between this aircraft and some of the aircraft I used to fly in the earlier years.
I get the feeling that your personal taste is for something a little more exciting. Perhaps you could tell us some of the aircraft that you have enjoyed flying.
Well, so I started with an Oyster Eaglet and Tiger Moth and Chipmunk, Harvard, and then I flew the Vampire and the Hunter. And I've flown a Dove, the de Havilland Dove, for many years. I flew it to the United Kingdom several times in earlier years.
As patron of the International Air Tattoo, what do you feel is special about this two-day event at Fairford?
I believe so it brings aviators together from throughout the world, but it also gives the public a chance to see what aviation has developed to. And beyond all that, so it is the Royal Air Force Benevolent Fund that does such good work, and certainly the Royal Air Tattoo is a chance to enable people to enjoy themselves and at the same time contribute towards a very worthy cause.
I know you enjoyed yourself at Fairford in 1985, and this year there are a record number of aerobatic display teams from many different countries. Do you have a particular favourite event that you're looking forward to this year?
I'm looking forward to seeing everything that there is, and I hope that the weather will be helpful to all of us spectators on the ground today.
The weather is not very brilliant at the moment, but we do hope it improves, and thank you very much, Your Majesty, for this interview.
Conducted by John Groom. But despite a royal command, the weather remained pretty grotty on the whole. However, there was the odd patch of blue, enough, for instance, for Flight Lieutenant John Fiennes of the RAF's No. 5 Squadron at Binbrook to swing a Lightning. The Lightning has been in service as a frontline fighter with the RAF for the past 27 years, and it's been a firm favourite with airshow crowds, partly because of its ability to use the power of its two Avon 302 engines to stay fairly close to the airfield boundary, unlike some of its contemporary jet fighters, which took miles to turn round. Nowadays, things like the F-16 and the Tornado do it with superior manoeuvrability, but the Lightning always looked as if it was doing it with sheer power. It should have been replaced by the Tornado F3, but that's held up by its Foxhunter radar not being ready for squadron service. However, the RAF insists that the 2 remaining Lightning squadrons will have gone by early next year. So this may be our last season for seeing Lightnings at air shows. Let's not forget the Skylift 87 theme, though, and this great monster is one of the world's biggest military transports. It's the C-5B Galaxy, and in fact this particular aeroplane was only delivered to the USAF in June. The type as a whole has been in service since 1970. It used to be described as the biggest aeroplane in the world, but the Soviets now have one bigger. And in fact, Howard Hughes's Spruce Goose was much bigger, but that only flew once in 1947, so the C-5 can still be called the biggest aircraft in the West. Its capabilities really are stupendous. It can carry things as big as the US Army's 74-ton mobile bridge and the M60 main battle tank, and no other Western aircraft can do that. It can carry an 82-ton load for more than 3,500 miles without refueling, and like other military transport aircraft, it can be refueled in flight. But perhaps the best way to describe its size is this. The total fuel load of a C-5 is more than the total all-up weight of the C-141 Starlifter that we saw earlier, the one with the female crew. And similarly, the total fuel load of that Starlifter is more than the total all-up weight of the Hercules, of which we've seen several, and which the tabloid press insists on calling the giant Hercules freighter. So the C-5 really is a pretty big piece of kit. And its flight deck looks pretty complicated.
The aircraft is about 249 feet long. Our normal cargo weight is around 250,000 pounds. We cruise at 0.77 Mach, which is, we use 0.77 for fuel economy and also to extend the engine service life. Normal runway, when we're heavy on a hot day, it can be up to around 8,000 feet is what we use.
Is there any particular problem in flying this plane, or is the problem the ground handling?
The biggest problem sometimes, if it is a problem, is driving it on the ground. That's the hard part. It is so large and you can't see to the rear. You can't see the end of the wingtips. The driving it can be a problem. But after you get it in the air, it flies like any other aircraft. Flies really well.
We can just sit down downstairs.
After that, Captain Stephen Waters took us on a tour of the downstairs. Followed that with a demonstration of the huge nose doors to the freight bay closing. The C-5 is in fact a roll-on, roll-off ferry of the air because the back opens as well. Clearly there's no possibility of the captain leaving those open by mistake. So after that, it was a look at some of the 28 wheels of the undercarriage.
The aircraft was in the forward kneeling position, so the nose gear was retracted back and up into the nose wheel well, and the main gear, the aircraft actually sat down on them. So what we've done is bring the nose up and the main gear up to raise the aircraft to the normal ground position for takeoff and landing so that we can operate it.
Well, after all that, could it really fly? Apparently it could. In fact, it flies with a strange grace, and because it's so big, it looks as if it's going pretty slowly, when really it's doing more than 500 miles an hour. and the effect is improved by the quietness of the General Electric TF39 GE1 engines, which are actually more powerful than Concords, but make a lot less noise. Now, if you think the C5's instrumentation and controls look complicated, this thing has a much more sophisticated system. It's a General Dynamics F-16 of the Royal Norwegian Air Force, and the thing about the F-16 is that it has fly-by-wire controls. There's no mechanical connection between the pilot's stick and the flying control surfaces. It's all done with computers. There are actually 4 of them, so if one fails, there are 3 others to take over. And if you think of it, that's better than a mechanical system. If that fails, you've nothing to back it up. Another thing about fly-by-wire is that it lets the pilot take the aeroplane to its limits, but doesn't let him go over them. Here, Lieutenant Jens Lipperstadt is flying at a very steep angle of attack, with the computers actually doing the flying. You can see the tailplane making big movements to keep control of the aircraft. You probably couldn't manage that with mechanical controls. But no fly-by-wire here, just some fairly basic mechanical controls for the outstandingly successful British Aerospace Harrier GR3, doing a short rolling takeoff.
The Hawker Harrier is the only plane of the free world able to take off and land vertically. How is that done?
Well, basically we have a very powerful engine behind us, and we're able to adjust the thrust from the engine so we can actually hover. Instead of using wingborne lift, we then translate to hoverborne lift. And to do this, we have next to us, we have the throttle, and next to the throttle we have a lever which controls 4 nozzles down the side of the aircraft to each side. For normal flight, they point backwards, i.e. we have the nozzle lever forwards, and to hover, we pull the handle back until the nozzles are pointing downwards. We then slow down, and as our wing lift decreases, we have to increase the thrust to maintain our height. Therefore, we're very vulnerable to our weight, how much we have on stores-wise.
Well, this kind of vector thrust, is it of any advantage besides hovering?
Yeah,
I mean, in combat, for instance.
In combat, it does have a certain amount of advantage. You've possibly read about it during the Falklands War. They used vectored in-flight thrust in flight.
How you call this specific procedure?
We call it VIF.
VIFing, yeah.
And it is actually being sold a bit too well, actually. It's not as good as advertised. However, it can get you out of a few sticky situations if you use it correctly. And the very experienced pilots can show the more junior pilots like myself a thing or two in the air.
No junior pilots in evidence here, though, as the Red Arrows in their distinctively coloured Hawks get airborne. Your chance here to compare the pride of Britain's display teams with the Italian Frecce Tricolori that we saw earlier. They both base their displays on the Diamond 9 shape, but the Arrows particularly pride themselves on the way they change smoothly from one shape to another. They call this one the Feathered Arrow. And as they pull away from us, they're changing back into diamond. So, how do they compare? Not much in it, I'd say, so far. This one they call Tornado, after the fighter bomber. And this is the Eagle formation. Like the Frecce, they do rollbacks, although the colour of the smoke is different, as you might expect. A quick flip into Concorde here, followed by the Caterpillar. One difference, though, is that the arrows don't split up into a 5 and a 4 like the Frecce do. Instead, they split 2 aircraft from the 9, and the 2 then do synchronized opposition maneuvers in between the main formation's passes.
Good.
But when they finally all get back together again, they have some interesting breaks. So, which is the better? It's hard to say. Perhaps the answer is to come back to IAT in 1989 and compare them again. In the meantime, from IAT 87, goodbye.